So as I said, usually in gaming, QA or testing, as you said, this is interchangeable. It means more or less the same. It's considered an entry position. So this is going to consider your first step in a gaming industry. And very often the companies, the studios are focused on the quantity over quality. It's generally people think, oh well, anybody who plays games can be a good QA tester, which is not necessarily the truth. And as I said, on a basic level, well, everybody can learn how to play the game, so everybody can learn how to do the testing, but it wouldn't necessarily make you a good tester. And of course, there are lots of skills and there are also personal traits that will help you in being a good tester. And I would always recommend, if you are entering your career in gaming through QA, if your ultimate goal is to go to the game design or production or coding, don't do bad job in QA. Don't just take, yeah, I'm just here for like 6 months and the first opportunity I'm gonna step up. Because firstly, if you don't do your job good as a QA, you are not really giving confidence to your employer that you are going to do a good job doing something else. So I would always say, if this is your goal, to take a QA as a step towards a different career in gaming, do the best job you can. It's important to prove to your employer that you are dedicated, you are committed, you are hardworking, and that you're ready to move to the next step. Being bad in QA, saying I don't care about it anyway because I'm a game designer, it's not going to open you many doors. So that even if it's not your career end goal, take it seriously, try to do it the best you possibly can. And as I said, like QA, I find it very rewarding because you really learn a lot, not only about the player and player expectation, but you will also learn a lot about how games are made, because you are kind of like in the middle of the team and you have to discuss things with the developers, with the game designers, with the producers, with the product managers. If you work in a live ops, monetization managers, executive producer. So you will really understand the intricacies of the production pipeline. And that makes you very, very knowledgeable about everything, kind of what's going on in a game team. So you understand the market, you understand the player, but you also understand how the teams function and how the games are really made. So talk about the skill set. So by all means, this is not all inclusive, as most of the things here, I try to give you a good overview, but it's not all inclusive, and it's impossible as well because many different studios have slightly different requirements. And also depends, do they have internal team? Do they do most of the QA internally? Do they do most of the QA externally? Do they have combo? What kind of combo? Is it a studio which is working primarily on consoles, or is it a studio which makes primarily mobile games? So there are lots of different factors to put into this. But these are some of the skill sets that will work for you across any type of studio, that would be always beneficial. So I'll go quickly through them. I can't emphasize this enough. Attention to detail. A QA is all about noticing small things and or something off or something odd. So you really need to kind of be able to spot this. And it's attention to detail not only in testing, but it's also in reporting. It's also in writing bug reports, making sure that everything is filled in properly, or when you're making a testing report, that everything is in its place and that you didn't omit something, and make sure to check and double check everything. Lots of people think that you're born with attention to detail. I'm not a scientist, so I can't really tell, are you born with attention to detail gene or not, but I can tell you that this is something that also can be learned, that some people might naturally be more inclined to pay attention to detail, but people can be trained to pay attention to detail as well. So this is also something that, even if you feel that, until now in your life you didn't pay much attention to detail, it's something that you can practice and become better at. Critical thinking, really important. Generally, QA is done independently, and you will be left alone with the test cases or with the game or with the builds. And you really need to be able to kind of use your own critical thinking and to understand, is this something that's working? It shouldn't be working. Whom should you talk to? It's really, really important, and it's gonna help you a lot in your work. Prioritization is super important as well. Very often you will have these conflicting priorities. As you mentioned before, in a production pipeline, there's never enough time for QA. I mean, let's say it's extremely rare that you have enough time for the QA, and you will need to make some decisions. How are you going to test? What you're going to test first? What you're going to spend the most time on? And it's a really important skill to have. Again, don't worry, the more you work with your team, the more you work with the games, the more you do this job, your prioritization skills get better. At the beginning, you will probably need a little bit of guidance from somebody who is senior in your team or from the producer. But the longer you work with the team, your prioritization skills are going to get better. Out of the box thinking, you might get some instructions that might be quite high level, or you might get instructions from developers who will look at the things from one angle. But you really need to have this possibility to look like outside of the box and to really kind of see things that from every possible corner. Communication skills super important. So even if I said when you're actually executing test cases, you're doing this on your own. On the other hand, you will probably have to ask lots of questions or have multiple discussions, either verbal or through the bugs or through the test reports. You might have to present the bugs. You might have to argue about bugs. So it's really, really important that you have a good communication skills, that you can ask the questions, that you can kind of communicate clearly, that you can also work together with the rest of the team, and that when you communicate, that you can avoid a conflict, because at the end of the day we all just want to make really good games. But sometimes if you approach a person from a different from a let's say angle that is maybe not the most desirable, of course people might take it personally. So in that way, it's really, really important that you have a good communication skills, written and verbal, and that you're not afraid to speak up and ask questions. Patience. In a QA, you will have to wait a lot. You will wait for builds. You will wait for the test case to run. You will have to wait for somebody to approve something. You will have to wait for, to reproduce the bug, or you might have to do it a couple of times, especially for the little bit weird ones. So yeah, it requires patience. This is one of the things in the QA where I would usually fail, because I'm known for not having much patience and wanting everything yesterday. So this is one of my downfalls. But again, patience is something that some people are naturally more patient, but it's also something that can be practiced. So that's something that you can improve on, even if you are having a bit of a short temper like me. Organizational skills. Again, you're going to be working with multiple stakeholders with different priorities. You will be, especially if the game is live, you will be working with the customer support. You will be working with your own production team. You might be doing something or helping out marketing. So you really need to be able to organize everything, because especially your time is limited for the QA as well. So it's really important to be able to organize your time and to organize your work in the best possible way. And we mentioned this before when I spoke about the communication. You're working with a team. Unless you're doing QA in an outsourced agency and you are completely removed from the team, you will be working with a team. And I said, even if you work in an outsourced QA agency, you'll probably have your own team of testers with whom you'll be working with. So it's really important, and especially in the modern game development, where QA is kind of representing the player in the team, it's important that you know how to work with a team efficiently. And then, of course, there's some technical skills as well. Now, there might be some specific technical skills depending on which game you're working on which type of software you're working on, or if you're doing QA for specific, let's say, not necessarily games, but part of software which will support game development. If you work on QAing the game engine or some kind of like analytics tools and things like that. But here we're talking about more general terms, so something that they can be taken across all types of the QA jobs in the gaming. So firstly, interest in technology, and not only passive interest, but proactive one. I mean, this is a key because the technology is changing all the time. It's developing all the time. You really need to be, on the edge of it, and that's something that's expected from you to bring yourself. That you might get some support at your work, but it's kind of like if you are in this job, you would be expected to spend some of your own time and just look into what's happening in the world of technology proactively, daily. And it's super important. So this affinity for technology is really, really important. And the more you know about it, especially if it relates to the games that you are working on, the better. Then bug reporting tools. Of course, if it's your first job in a QA, you probably won't know this, but it's really, really important, if you're going for the QA jobs, that you know how most common bugs databases work, like Jira or Hansoft, or Bugzilla was popular for some time. I'm not sure that people use it this much these days anymore. So knowledge of the bug reporting tools and knowledge of any like test cases tool, this is going to really, really help you. A knowledge of the platform. So if your game is coming to the Steam, if it's going to the iOS or the App Store, to the Google Play, the more you know about the platform requirements, how it works, submissions, how it works, what's important for the platform, what specifics of the platform, it's better for you as a tester. Any knowledge of testing methodology is going to help you, especially when you are facing the tasks which seem like huge, that you have so much testing to do, very little time. Instead of just playing game like a maniac, actually having a knowledge of testing methodology is going to help you optimize your time and do this more efficiently. And this is especially important if you're working in a team which doesn't have a senior QA or QA management. You're first in a team that you really understand what methodology is and how you can use it to your benefit. Understanding the game design. Now, this is something that it will save you lots of trouble if you really understand how the game design works. I worked with the QA people who were not gamers and had no interest in the game design, and then they started to test games, and it was kind of the first thing that they took, and then they reported lots of bugs which were not really bugs at all, because they didn't understand how the games work on the platforms or how the progression in the games work, because there are certain limitations of like technically what can be done, and there are certain things which are done as a common practice in games on the certain platforms. So understanding this type of the overall like high level game design, how the games actually work, it really helps. And then, of course, when you discuss your specific product that you're working on, a little bit more in-depth understanding of the game design. Because otherwise, there will be conflict in the team, because if you are not able to understand the game design, you will be reporting bugs which might be irrelevant, and it's going to cause strain in a team. Mind you, with that said, there really might be a situation that there are problems with the game design, that the game loops are not closed, or the game is heavily unbalanced, or something like that, and that's a different story. But the more you understand game design, you'll be able to argue these cases better, because if you really understand how a game is supposed to work from the point of the game design, then you can have this discussion with the game designer. But if you don't, even if you're right, you might not be taken seriously. So it works for you. We have to really understand the game design in general, game design overall practices for that platform or genre, but also for your particular game that you're working on. Gaming skills. Now, this is something that might be a little bit controversial and might be taken wrong. I would not say let's put it this way. Let's say that you get a job and you're testing a mobile game, something similar like Candy Crush, that you are testing match 3 game on mobile, free to play. I mean, if you are an expert in Overwatch, it doesn't really matter at all. But if you play other match 3 games on mobile, that does matter. So take gaming skills with a grain of salt. Nobody expects you to be, competitor in a e-gaming if you're going to be testing mobile casual games, because it's not really that related. I mean, it might help, but sometimes actually it doesn't help. It makes it worse. Because I've seen people who are like call themselves serious gamers and then they just hate casual games, say that the whole game's crap and it's broken. No, it's just not up to your taste. It's a very different story. So take these gaming skills with a grain of salt. First, if you're applying for the job with a company which makes games, play those games that that company makes, which are commercially available. It's almost a little bit disrespectful if you don't play these games before you apply for the job. So play those games. If needed, invest a bit of money in them and play them. So secondly, you might start working and you might not have gaming skills, but you would be expected to pick them up as you work, because it will just help you understand the standards of the gaming industry in the part of it where you work. Like I will tell you example from my career when we had situation. I was working on a mid-core mobile free-to-play mid-core game, and it was in production robot. It doesn't matter. Here's just the case that basically the loading time was really long. It was over 2 minutes as far as I remember. And we argued with developers that this needs to be fixed, that it's a bug. And then they said, no, actually it's not, because the game still loads. But then we could use as a benchmark, like, hey, but when you look at the games or the competition, their loading times are like half of, the worst one is like half of our time. Some of the most successful games in the genre have the loading time of like 20-30 seconds. So just understanding how the other games in the genre work, what is the standard, managed to help us improve our game and managed to help us improve the performance of the game and managed to improve eventually retention of the game. So if you don't play other games, you would not have a clue about how long it takes. So this is something that, as that you don't necessarily, I would not see that you have to be a pro or hardcore gamer before you start a job in the gaming industry in a QA, but take it as a sign of respect. Play the games that the company that you're applying for makes. Play the games of a similar genre. Play the games on those platforms. And when you get that job, play more. Try to play more games of the same genre. Try to play competitors' games. Try to understand the whole ecosystem of where this game belongs to, because it's gonna make your job much easier, and you're gonna be able to do way better job. It will be much more useful to the whole team, and it's going to help you in your gaming career overall. Then understanding production processes. So of course, every company, every studio has slightly different production processes. I mean, there are some good practices, but as I said, they vary a lot and depends about many things, from geographical location to the platform to the size of the team, many things. But when you start to work in the gaming studio, you should have at least an idea how the production process works on some kind of high level, and then of course learn it as you work, because it's really important that you understand, because otherwise, when you report bugs, you have to understand how prioritization works, what's the severity, how it affects the product. And the more you understand how the things work and how the development process works, how the pipelines work, you will be it's going to help you do the much better job. And last but not least, these days, most of the gaming studios are working with some kind of agile methodology. So knowledge of Scrum or Kanban or similar agile methodology is really going to help you out. So this is already going to give you like a little bit of a step in that if you work with a Scrum or Kanban before. It doesn't necessarily have to be the games. If you work with any type of software and in an agile environment, it's a big plus. So now we talk about skills. So let's talk a little bit about QA as a career. I mean, this is one example of how this it should be a pyramid, how this pyramid or looks in a QA. But as I said, it can be very different. It depends on the company, and sometimes they would use words that would mean something very different in a different company. That's the same with production, sometimes even with the titles in development. So as I said, take this with a grain of salt again, but I try to simplify this, but let's go through this. So usually when we start, so I'm starting from the bottom here. Let's see. So I'm starting from the bottom here. We start from the QA tester. So this is the entry position job. But usually you start as a junior QA tester or QA testing trainee. And you can go all the way to the senior QA tester. In some companies they have you can specialize and become a senior QA tester. And here the job is really about executing testing tasks, possibly writing test cases, reporting bugs, maybe making testing reports, but you kind of work mostly hands-on here. Then above that, it's a QA lead. Again, this can be called QA supervisor, QA, even senior QA might sometimes have these responsibilities as well. QA coordinator, so it can be called any of those names. And here you have a little bit more responsibilities than just a tester. For example, usually the QA leads would organize outsourced testing. So if you have any kind of outsourced testing partners who help you out, either with the functional testing or with localization, for example, QA lead will usually organize this part and lead this part as well. So they would be in charge to supervise the outsourced team to make sure that they get the resources they need to do their job, and they'll go through their reports and make sure they report and do everything what they need to do. QA lead is very often in charge of the testing approach. So how are we going to test this in the time that has been given to us? Testing supervision, so overall making sure that how the things are working or are they working. Excuse me. And sometimes they will also do hands-on testing, but it's generally more demanding. So they will do hands-on testing if it's something quite complex, or if you are having a really tough time and you're short on people, there will kind of be this kind of extra workforce who jumps on board. So this is usually the role of the QA lead. Above QA lead, there's a QA manager. QA manager generally would manage several projects. So if your studio has a couple of games, they're going to be having this overall charge of several of these projects. They would have a HR responsibility for the team, so they would do assessment of the QA leads or QA testers. They would approve holidays, sick leaves, things like that. QA manager possibly will monitor budgets, so they'll have the budgets that they need to look into and maintain and report how much money is spent, how much money is left. They will also do project analysis, and most of the time they're leading hiring process. So these are the people who would make this final stamp that somebody is hired. Very often you would have a QA lead as well involved in the recruitment of the new QA team members. QA testers, rarely. Depends on the team, but rarely. Usually it's QA lead and the QA manager who are making these kind of decisions. And on the top, it's a QA director. So QA director has more of the role of the leading the whole QA as a discipline. And it also represents QA as a discipline to the rest of the company management, to the C-level executives, to the board of the company if needed. So they are kind of this person who represents everybody who works in or with QA, or within the QA. So it's not with the QA, but within the QA. QA director also decides on an overall team structure. So it comes from them who is going to, how the whole QA setup in the organization is going to work. They will prepare budget and get it approved. And they're also the kind of deciding factor in selecting partners. So if you have any outsource partners. Usually it's a QA director who selects those partners. QA manager can suggest or can even lead negotiations, but QA director at least needs to rubber stamp them, if nothing else. But generally, they're quite involved in these kind of things. So this is one of ways how it can work. But as I said, in different companies, there could be very different QA structure. And then, of course, there are companies where you could side branch. For example, they would have their own testing automation. So if you are quite technical and interested in that, you might be able to branch into that. Or you might be able to branch into release management, which is also very often kind of part of QA or heavily related to the QA. So there are these possibilities of going sideways as well in the QA. Don't necessarily just up and down. Usually you hopefully want to go up, not down this pyramid. And the QA is getting more recognition in the industry. The importance of QA is being noticed, but it's not there yet. It's still compared to the serious software, where it's considered being exceptionally important. In gaming, it's still not there. It's still considered as the cheaper the better, and we don't have to think about it too much. One thing I also want to put here that good testers might not necessarily make good managers. As we can see here, the quite difference in the duties already starts here. And when you go to the QA manager, there's no more hands-on testing anymore. And somebody who is excellent QA tester might not have the skills to be a good QA manager, might not even have good skills to be a QA lead. So I would suggest that, that if you have people in a QA and you want to reward them, try to find also some other way to reward them as well, not to only have possibility of being promoted to QA lead or QA manager. Set up some kind of heavy bonus or make kind of the expert path. Because as I said, somebody who is an absolutely wonderful, excellent tester, the best tester in your team, it might become the worst manager in your organization. Or if you want to make sure that people really kind of grow into the role as the leaders, provide them some support, provide them additional training, train them for the future responsibilities they're going to have. So let's talk about qualifications, because very often people ask, do I need to have a university degree? Do I need to have a bachelor's in QA? As far as I know, it's not possible to study QA, to have a degree that you have a bachelor of QA. I know it's part of many studies, it's part of many universities' curriculums, but you can't, as far as I know, until now, and this is being recorded in 2021, that you actually can't have a degree in QA. Of course, having a degree, it's useful, especially if you have some kind of technical degree. That would be very useful, because it will just help you understand the architecture of the software, architecture of the games much faster, which is very beneficial for the QA. But generally, it's not required. I've rarely seen it to be as a must-have requirement. So it helps, but do you have to have it? Not really. But what is usually required, it's a previous QA experience. That always helps. And I'm going to tell me, well, how can I get a QA experience if I don't get a job in a QA? There's some things that you can do to help you out, even if you don't get, if you don't have professional QA experience. So one of those is, for example, joining open betas or early access games where you can try to act as a tester and proactively report bugs. You can volunteer maybe your time as well. So any kind of experience with the gaming, with the games, or being in a position to test something or report bugs, even if it wasn't paid full-time job, it will help you. If you can get an internship in a QA, that will definitely help you. So, even if you had 2 months internship, even if you had a school project and you were doing QA, it's going to help you. And one of the things that's really important is to understand the target player. So this is something that I've seen very often mismatched, that the studios will hire people who are gamers, but they don't necessarily like or understand the players who are playing the games the studio is making. So try to really put yourself in the player's shoes, and I would say the more understanding for the target player of the that you have, it's gonna be easier for you to get the position in that company as well. So that's why it's also important, play the games the company that you're applying for makes, and really understand for whom those games are made, and try to put yourself in that target player shoes, because this is going to help you open the doors when you're going for the job interview. Talking about the job interview, here we are. So there are some tips for recruiting and interviewing. So of course, depends like from which angle you're looking at this. This is something for the QA if you're already in a position that you are actually hiring somebody, but also for you if you're going for an interview, what can you expect and what's behind sometimes awkward questions. Very often you'll get a test. So a test is generally to test a game that the studio make or made before, and they will ask you to create sample bugs, or they might ask you some questions in the test, like how do you resolve team conflict or things like that. This is a very common question that you will get. So be prepared for that. That very often that these interviews would require a written test. You might be asked unusual questions. Why is this? Because in QA, circumstances change all the time. So throwing at you off-ball question makes us see how do you react under stress or when the situation really changes. Generally, there is no right or wrong answer on these questions. It's really like we want to see how you react. One of the questions that when I was doing hiring for QA, what we would like to ask in the middle of the interview, between the serious questions, we would like to ask a question, tell me a joke. I can tell you I heard so many horrible jokes, but we didn't really judge the quality of joke. We really were kind of trying to see how the person behaves when they are kind of thrown this type of curveball, because you will be thrown this type of curveballs at work. And basically, the only thing that is really red flag for us as employers was if person would get angry. If the person really get angry for us asking that question, then we knew this is not a good fit, because that's how the person is going to react in a real life as well when when things don't go as planned and something crazy happens and we all have to turn 180 degrees from what we did the last 2 hours. So this is for you to understand that you might be asked random weird question. Please, here I don't mean questions that are inappropriate, but questions, as I said, like tell me a joke in the middle of the serious interview. They're there for a reason. Then you might get asked, this is one of my favorite questions, like how would you test mundane or unusual objects? So very often you will be asked like, how do you test a pen, or how would you test this napkin? And here is, of course, first you might be surprised, but it's of course it's a product. It has a purpose. It's used for something. We just want to see like, do you have this analytical mind, and how do you approach testing? Again, when we interview, when we are hiring people for QA, we do expect people to be gamers to a certain degree. So, if you want some e-gaming competition, great, but it's generally not required. But at least we expect you to play the games from the studio you are applying for. It's kind of a little bit like a courtesy. It's kind of it's not that hard and it's not that painful. You are asked to play the game. You're not asked to do some very demanding calculations, or do some kind of hands-on 1 month building project. It's pretty simple, should be pretty enjoyable. Do it. You will be asked also, how would you test that game? And very often studios are asking that. So how would you test our game? How would you approach our game? Or they would ask you, when you played our game, did you notice any bugs? Did you notice something weird? Please, here I just want to say one thing that I heard is, I've seen some of the forums that people are saying like, oh, they ask me these questions, they want me to work for them for free. no serious professional studios asking you this to get free bugs. They generally have a huge QA budgets, and they really don't want to spend time from their management to interview people to might get one or two free bugs. The industry doesn't work like this. So no, they're not trying to get you to work for free being on a job interview. They're trying to see, do you really play the game? Did you really notice something? Of course, the game might be very mature and you might notice nothing. You might say, no, actually I played it, looks very smooth. I'm pleasantly surprised. It's awesome. Looking forward to hear more about your QA processes because the game is working so well. Or you might have found something. Don't also invent bugs that don't exist. So there's no pressure necessarily here to talk about the bugs that you haven't found. But you found something, please share it. It's not a scheme to get a free testing. And of course, if you are senior, if you have experience in QA, if you worked in QA before, then you can probably expect some more demanding QA questions. Then it can go really into detail and it can get quite deep. But if it's for the junior position, generally you will not be positioned there. As I said, some things touching down here are a little bit senior, and let's see how this course goes. If there's enough interest, I might make another one for the QA management where we can discuss more things like that. Okay, this is a bit of a relief slide, so to give you a little bit of a break. I just find it funny because it's actually true. I found this online. Honestly, the QA desks are one of the most one of the most creative one I've seen, and especially like the part where it says a few programming books to give the impression the tester can code. Very often you will find this in the gaming studios that if you are knowledgeable about coding, or if you know some coding, that you are maybe taken a bit more serious. So hey, if you like, you can always fake it a little bit, you can always fake it a little bit. But yeah, so I said I found this pretty entertaining and quite close to the truth, and I think it relates nicely to the things that we passed through before in this course. Exploratory testing notes turns into doodling notebook. It's been known to happen. So yeah, so as I said, there's no rules about that, how your desk should look like, but very often they look like this. And right, so we talked a bit about career routes within the QA. So how your career within QA might develop, might go. But there are also different career routes you can take where you kind of take QA as a stepping stone to do something else within a gaming studio. Very often, QA will lead to production and design. So most of the time, again, it's not always, but most of the time, very often it happens that from QA, people pass into the production. This was my personal route as well, that I went from the QA to the production. So, and then from then to the leadership and, to being a CEO and entrepreneur and no, who knows, writer. So of course, it's a start, and it can lead very often to that. It can lead to the design as well. It's a very good experience for the game designers because they would get lots of hands-on experience on what players expect and how they react with the game. So also very often it happens that from QA the career takes you more towards the game design. Of course, if you have a technical background, it might lead towards the coding roles, more towards development. And I mentioned this before, the QA actually understands player probably the best, maybe besides the customer support teams, but they also understand the intricacies of production pipelines. So you kind of have this optimal knowledge of somebody who really understands the player, what they want and how they behave, and at the same time they understand the internal structures, how games are made, and how long it takes to make them. So it makes you kind of like a really knowledgeable about some of the most important aspects of the game development. And that makes you, of course, suitable for the wide range of jobs as well. As a QA, even if it's an entry position, very often it can lead towards the leadership positions in the future. And yeah, of course, it's great to build your QA team, and you if you pay attention, you start with the awesome some awesome people working there and can do great stuff for your game. But of course, when you work in a QA, there's always a need to keep the team excellence. So it's really important for the QA to have regular trainings to get familiar with all the changes that are happening uh, in the industry, but also within the company as well, especially if your company is quite big and if you do some major changes. And QA should get opportunity to network and learn, to also talk with the people who do the QA in the other gaming studios and to learn from each other, because this is the way how else you can compare and improve on your in your own studio. It's important for QA to be involved in all aspects of team operations because they kind of interact with everybody, and if they're excluded, they might actually miss on something, and it might make the QA's job much more difficult. Uh, this is also something from the employer that they can do to provide books, magazines, visits from the industry gurus or experts, and to invite the QA to participate in those. And of course, if you are in a QA, if you have these opportunities in your company, take them. Or you might even suggest, it's like, hey, there is this great magazine or books. Can we get it for the studio library? Um, it's important to provide different routes for specialization and promotions for the QA as well, because I said, like, QA can be a little bit monotonous job. It can be very difficult, and some people are happy doing it for like forever. But if you're doing it for a couple of years, very many times people want to kind of take a little bit more responsibilities, or maybe different responsibilities, and make sure that you have this career path that is lined up in the organization. Now, QA should also be included in any type of company bonuses. And as I said, like, QA's job can be quantified, but this doesn't kind of tell the whole story either. If you put as one of the targets for your QA team number of bugs reported, you are going to have QA kind of splitting the bugs in three just to get the bigger numbers, or they'll start to report things that are really relevant just to make up the numbers. So, having a number of bugs, sure, it can be one of the indicators, but having it like the only indicator, it's not really indicator of the quality of how your QA team members perform. So I say make sure that you have realistic and relevant targets for your QA team, and make sure they also include any type of internal bonus systems. Also, there are lots of conferences in the gaming industry, loads everywhere, but there are also few that are about the QA. So, as a QA person, ask to be taken to the conferences, and when you go to those conferences, like, learn, go on the lectures and network. Don't take this as a trip and then skip half of the conference. Just try to attend as much as possible and try to network as much as possible. um, QA should be able to have channels for the feedback, because QA has very valuable overview of the overall game and of the production process, and as well they have the knowledge of the player. So make sure that the QA has a way to have suggestions on, for example, about the product, or about the improvement of the process, or even improvements for the team, that they don't have to write bugs to suggest those, but there's a way for the QA that they can express themselves, and that these suggestions are going to be seen and decided on by somebody who actually has the power to make those decisions. And I would also like to say, very often QA is an ungrateful job, that if everything goes smooth, they don't get any credit, because, then you will get production team, or maybe producer doesn't get much credit either, but, developers will get a credit, but nobody's going to give credit necessarily to the QA who, found that critical bug on time. But of course, when something is not working and something is broken, then everybody's like, how about the QA? And nobody looks into how much time they had, how many people they had, like what they could actually do, or that maybe they reported a bug and nobody wanted to fix it. So make sure that QA gets appreciation for the hard work. QA is working hard, and it's very often invisible job, especially if the QA does a really good job. It's very often invisible. So it's important that that your QA team understands their responsibilities and their importance, and that they also get not only constructive criticism, but they also get praise when the things go well, that they are included in that, because it's going to make your team much happier, much more efficient, and it's going to make your QA team want to stay doing QA for longer. So I hope you enjoyed this module and that you learned a little bit about what makes a good QA tester and how the QA careers might work for you. See you on the next one. Hello, and welcome to the module where we are going to talk about the role of QA in the team. We mentioned this before that QA can be a lonely job, and sometimes it is done in a way that is separated from the team. But that's not necessarily the best way. I personally believe that's never really a good way. And at least in some stages, QA has to work with other members of the team, even if they're physically separated or even if the QA is done by the different company. So let's dwell a little bit into how QA fits with the team. So where does QA fit? QA is very often seen as the odd one out uh, because by the nature of their work, you are kind of trying to find mistakes and breaks with what somebody else did. So by nature of it, sometimes there's a bit of a resistance to the QA or even a dislike. Very frequently, QA get access to the games only when they're already considered done and finished, so they wouldn't have an early input in a game design or game architecture or what to pay attention to. And very often the important decisions are done without any of the QA input. So decisions about new features, decisions about even changing the dates, or even about the QA itself and about QA resourcing and timelines. Sometimes they're done without actual QA people being present or asked for input, unfortunately. So, and there's lots of these urban legends and stories about arguments between QA and developers. I have to say, based on my experience, sometimes it's true, uh, sometimes it's not. Most of the time, you can have a wonderful working relationship with the development team, but sometimes it happens as well that there is a bit of animosity and that developers don't necessarily understand fully what QA is doing, or the QA sometimes don't really understand how the development team operates. So all of this, can happen, and it can make the QA position a little bit odd. Uh, but why is QA important? We spoke about it in length before. And here's still a couple of examples of the really bad bugs that were found and that caused significant problems. Software testing developed through the years, and importance of the QA grew as well. So while it was considered until like 1990s really as a constraint and something that it's not necessarily needed to be done. In the 90s, for the first time, we saw there is actually need, because we start to work more with the customers, with the customer support. You start to get tickets, and you're like, okay, users are complaining, we have to do something about it. And generally, in the 21st century, QA is looked upon as an asset and as something that it's an essential part of developing any software, not only games. Uh, but of course, as I said, the role is still a bit confusing and unclear. And while in some organizations it's going to be considered as really important, in some of them might be just an afterthought as well. So, how the QA fits when you talk about the agile working environment? Mind you, these days, most of the gaming studios would work in some type of agile working environment. And here the QA role is slightly different. QA is supposed to represent the player and should be part of the planning process. And here everybody shares responsibility for their work. So developers and artists should also kind of contribute to the QA work as well. Check their own work on does it on devices, especially if there are any major changes, or that they should do a little bit of testing themselves before they commit the builds for testing. And QA in Agile is generally embedded in the team. So it's a part of the team which participates in development and can give input and advice and works together with the rest of the team. And so this is how it should work. It's not always like that, but it is very often like this. So how to work together with a QA? What's the ideal way to work together? Every team is different, and every game is different. There are different needs of the team and of the game and of the players. But here are some rule of thumbs on what's the kind of good way to work together. Firstly, make sure the bug flow is clear. We have the whole module on the bug flow, how to set it up, and some examples. So make sure this is clear and that everybody understands what's their role in it, and what type of stakeholders they are. Um, it's important to understand for the whole team that QA is here to help, to make the best possible game, and it's not an enemy. It's not an enemy of development. It's not the enemy of production. QA is here to make sure that the players are happy. QA, again, said I strongly believe shouldn't be separated from the team. The more separated QA is from the team, the more mistakes QA is gonna make, and it's not because of they don't know what they're doing or their job is not needed. Is the more they are removed from the source of the information and more they are removed from the rest of the team, they have more of the tunnel vision, and it's much harder for them to understand the priorities and risks. Um, Make clear that the process for escalation is understood by everybody. At the end of the day, there's no winners or losers here. If there is dispute about specific bug or bug flow or how things are done, this should be brought up to the producer who will make this final decision. Okay, how are we gonna do this? So rather than ended up in some kind of conflict loop or everybody insisting on their point of view, if you realize that they can't, there is a misunderstanding about priority of the bug or importance of the bug or how something should be done, take it to the producer who's going to take next steps to resolve that issue. And then, if it's not resolved as the QA would want, try to understand a bigger picture. Don't take it personally, because sometimes we see things from our own angle, and that's why producer makes these decisions, because she or he would have like just a wider picture of what's going on in the team, what are the priorities and what are the needs. Don't let your personal feelings become priority over the game. That can happen as well, especially if you're a gamer yourself, and if you work on a project for a long time and you start to feel the ownership of it. I think it's a great thing when you feel the ownership of the game, and it makes the work so much more meaningful and so much more rewarding. But the other hand, sometimes we become too subjective as well. So make sure that your personal feelings are not prioritized over the real needs of the game. And for all of you who are listening to this, but you are not from the QA side, help QA. help QA. The more QA understands about the game architecture, about the code, about how things are done, about the priorities, about the design big picture and a small picture, and the effect of game design and effect on features, or aimed effect of the features on the player, they will be finding more relevant bugs, and QA will be able to focus on more important or the most important things in the game as well. Now, even in the best teams, there's sometimes troubles, and there could be problems on multiple levels. So when we talk about troubleshooting, it's really important to decide who is in your organization ultimately responsible for the QA. Is it a producer? Is it executive producer? Is it a QA manager, QA director, CTO, COO? It should be clearly specified who is that person who has the ultimate responsibility for the QA. And hopefully that person who makes his final calls about the QA, how is it done, and the best practices and the teams should have the knowledge and understanding of the QA discipline. So not only something that it's done and it's kind of like I don't need to know about it, but to really understand why is it important, how is it done, what are the best way to do it. So I hope that maybe if you're listening to these courses, if you are that person, you will learn more about QA. First step in any troubleshooting, it's always communication. Try to understand different points of view and be open, like let it flow, because if we kind of hold it back, it will just cause more confusion, more misconception, and potentially more conflict as well. Also, very often, it's not really a QA, but it's the process. It can look the team is angry, but they are angry at the process, how it works, not the tester. It's not actually personal. It's about a broken process. And this is something that it's much easier to fix. Very often we inherited old processes that served the team before us or the studio in the early days. But now they're completely changed. They don't work. So everybody does a little bit of their own, and then everybody is unhappy. That means, and of course, testers pay the final price. That means it's just a time to update the process and work together with the team to do it. And try to do the post-mortem for live bugs. And here I mean specifically for critical bugs or big bugs. We talk about it in a different module, QA and live ops, where we go a little bit more detail about it. Try to learn what's wrong, why, without putting blame on anybody. Try to understand why this bug happened. What did we learn from it, and how can we prevent from this happening in the future? Because that way we make it a positive experience for the whole team, and we continuously improve on our practices and release processes, rather than making it a blaming game or putting the blame only on QA. Because generally, blaming kind of people and individuals in situations like this, it rarely helps team become better or the game become better. It's about preventing these things happening in the future and learning from our mistakes. So very often you will do the QA with remote teams. It's very often outsourced either completely or partially. And there are companies who specialize in only doing the QA. So how to work with them and how to get the most out of them. Firstly, prepare clear reporting guidelines. Tell them what you wanted to report to you. Do you want them to report on the test cases execution? Do you want a bug summary? So what kind of reports you want from them? If you don't tell them anything, at best they will send you something of their own, which might be useless, or they will send you nothing. Then also give them guidance how to report it. Do you want to have Excel sheet? Do you want to have some kind of chart? Do you want to have descriptive Word document? Do you have some kind of databases where you want them to report? They will not know if you don't tell them. Again, if you don't tell them, they will just do something of their own and might not be what you want. And also tell them how frequently you want them to report. Do you want daily report? Do you want weekly? Do you want end of the day? Do you want a start of the day and end of the day? I mean, again, if you don't specify, you can expect it in a very random times. So make sure to specify clear reporting guidelines, how often you want them to report, in what time, and what should this report include. Then nominate somebody who is going to be ultimately representing your company to the outsourced QA team. This is the person that's going to handle the most communication, and for example, it's going to be responsible for sending out the right builds, sending out the most important testing information, and they will handle most of the inquiries from the tester side. Make sure that you appoint somebody who actually has time to do that, because especially early on in testing process with a new partner or on the new game, it's going to take some time before you learn how to work together. So somebody who should have time to do it, and somebody who has at least awareness of how it should be done, will understand the QA needs. Thirdly, make sure to have clear channels of communication, where you can follow up and ask questions, and make sure that all relevant parties are on that communication channel. You know, if it's something that you have two CEOs talking, it's not going to be very productive. You want to have a channel where you want to have testers and somebody from development team who is hands-on, being able to discuss and clear out any ad hoc issues and questions. Please remember, remote QA just sees what you tell them. They're not in the office with you. They don't hear any conversation. They can't access all of your documentation. So they only know what you tell them. So make sure that you communicate everything clearly and timely to them. And also, regularly check the reports. It's very often happens that at the beginning you start to check the reports, and then you kind of gain this confidence in your testing team, and they're like, oh well, I don't need to check these reports anymore. Please check those reports. They give you really valuable information. And if it's something is unclear or confusing, don't be afraid to ask questions from your outsourced team, because they might be doing something wrong without knowing, or there just might be some confusion in the communication, and you will help them do the better and more useful reports in the future. To kind of showcase how these reports could look like if you never had an experience of working with them, on the next slide, I'm going to show you the example of one of those reports. This is by no means the ultimate report. There are many, many different reports and many, many different ways how you can do this. But this one would have some of the most important information. So here we have testing hours total, which is 7.5. That means this is one full working day. We are testing on Android, so there's one tester on Android, and well, there's nothing here, so we presume there was 0 iOS testers. Here's the list of the devices that were pre-approved for testing for this particular game or this particular testing round. And the ones that are marked green here, that means that we were testing, the testers tested on these two devices. So Galaxy A5 and Galaxy S7. These are the version of the operating systems they were using. So this kind of makes it very clear to see, okay, what the testers, in our case, one tester have been doing today. And then we have seen, okay, which bugs were found. They found 3 bugs, one of the highest priority, high and normal. And we worked on, the testers worked on Android build, this version, Sprint 40, it was worked on this platform, so staging and debug. So this kind of gives you this overall information where you can quickly assess, so we had one person testing the whole day, they have been working on the correct platform, that's all okay. They cover these 2 devices. Yeah, we now know that it needs to be tested on these platforms. And we see that there's a couple of bugs here that actually should be looked into because they have a quite high priority. As I said, this is just one example how it looked like. This is also not a complete report because it's a bit cut off on the bottom, but it has private information we don't want to share here. So this is just the information that can be widely shared. So just gives you an idea of how this report can look like. But as I said, very often they would also go into more details, and very often they would also include a textual part where the testers would give some kind of summary of how the testing went, and what went well, what went wrong, or some other things they might have noticed while they did testing. Sometimes they would also send some recommendations based on their testing work, and you as a developer can always tell them what else would you like or what you don't like in this report. So I hope that it gave you some information on how the QA works with the team. And I said again, this is very um, difficult topic to put to generalize, because every team is different and every team has their own little unique ways how they include QA and how it all works together. So I said, like, if you are just looking for your job in a first job in a QA in games, it might be slightly different from the things that I explained here. But wherever you work in a QA, as I said, there are certain things that, just based on experience always work better. Try to get involved in a game development as much as possible, even if not as an active participant, at least as a passive participant, to kind of get early knowledge of what are the plans with the games, where is the team taking it, because it's going to help you to plan your work for the future. So I hope that you found this presentation useful and you learned something new, and I'll see you in the next module. Bye. Hello and welcome to the test management. This module is really an introduction to the test management, because it is at the end of the day beginner's course, but I thought it's important to touch down on it. You will understand, if you're just starting in your QA career, you will understand some decisions and the ways how decisions are made by the test management. And also, if you have any affinity to personally move towards a test management, it will give you some tools and understanding of how to go about it. So let's begin. A little bit about test management role. Of course, every company, every gaming studio has their own definition of the roles, and the job description is going to be slightly different. It's never 100% the same. But there are some common things that, as a test manager, wherever you work, you will kind of come under your domain. Very important, test managers promote testing as a discipline. What does this mean? In many organizations, there is a misunderstanding of the testing role, in importance of it, and also understanding how is it done. So the test manager's role is to promote testing as a discipline and educate the rest of the company about the importance of it, at least on a high level. What does it involve? Also to advocate for bugs and stability, to make sure that there is enough time for the crucial tests to be done and that certain bugs really need to be fixed. Because again, very often it happens, there is a bit of a disconnect or misunderstanding about certain bugs, why they should be prioritized or why they should be fixed. And in my personal experience, this is some of the most heated discussions in the teams were actually about that, about the bugs. Test managers should keep the 3 lists and keep an eye on three things besides others. Risks, testing risks and product risks, list of main issues, and current coverage, so where we are with the testing progression. Of course, this is a role where you frequently report on the status and dynamics of the testing to the rest of the team or to the studio leadership. And of course, huge part of the job is to support the testing team, to support the QA, and to lead the overall operations. That means that make sure that everybody has the tools that are needed, that everybody has the skills that are needed, and that the team is functioning as it should. So a little bit about test planning and execution coverage, because that's one of the most important things in a testing management. First thing when we start the planning, it's about identifying the units which are going to be tested. Are there use cases flow, is there a list of requirements, a list of features, etc. Again, there could be slight differences depending on your organization. And then after that, you build test cases and or prioritize testing areas based on risk. And usually we have risk which is like high, medium, low. I would say it would be good to test this if you have time. And of course, it's about the tracking. We have a number of test cases that are built for each priority if we are using test cases. And then test execution, number of tests executed for each priority, but also with the status, which is really important that because this tells us about the maturity of the game that we are testing. It's great if we execute all of the high priority tests, but if they all fail, it's not really good, because it means there is still lots of work ahead of the team. Now, test plan is a document. Of course, you know, if I go, I will not go into the details of it, but if one day I decide to make the advanced games QA course, then there will probably be the whole module about the test plan. Here I'm just going to touch down on it. Some organizations don't use it at all, some use it frequently, some use it in some shape and form. It can be a very short document, or it can be a very long and very complex one. There is actually specified preferred formats in ISO standard 12207 and also in ISTQB, which is a derivation of that model. But I will not go into this here. And I said I have rarely seen these templates being used in the gaming industry. Said in the real world, test plans should be suitable for the QA team that is actually using it. So it should be a tool for the team rather than a document that looks good and has too much information. And it basically should serve to help identify early requirements that QA team need to do their job in an optimal way, and also some of the major things, like major framework for the testing, in case when you get a new team members or team members change, or you put, like, for example, in a certain stage external QA on board, that you will actually have this basic information in one place, and that person doesn't have to get lost or ask around. They can always go back to the document and check like how to go on with the testing. So of course, tools that we are using that will include any bugs databases, any technology that we are using. If we are using a specific hardware as well, should be listed there. Resources available, so who is going to be working on this project. Documents, is there any documentation that we are using, that we are basing our test cases on? Do we have any bugs templates? Are we using GDD, game design document, or is there a list of use cases, links to these documents, and having them listed there, it's very beneficial. And of course, at least a high level schedule, so how much time you have to do this job. Of course, these plans can have more detailed information here. They might have a link to the actual test cases. They might have a very detailed breakdown of work, but as a base, they should have at least this. Now I'm going to talk a bit about estimates, because estimates, it's probably one of the hardest things to do in a QA. It's probably one of the hardest, not probably, but definitely the most hardest thing to do in the project management and in a game production as well, because no two projects are alike. And of course, having experience really help. But of course, if you change your tools, if you change the engine that you're using, if you change your team, even your experience might not be that indicative. So it's a hard thing to do. And I will teach you about a couple of methodologies that can help you out with this. Because there are numerous different ways how you can do this. They will often depend on what is the risk, what methodology you're using, how experienced is your team, or how long it has been working together, what's the main focus, what's the complexity of the feature that you are testing. Is it a new code, is it the old code, what kind of processes that you have, and lots of other factors. And we spoke about it in length in the previous lessons. Here are some basic numbers to help you out. Generally, weekly number of hours per tester, like working hours, if it's a full-time person, it's somewhere around 40, depending on where you work and what are your regulations in the country where you're living. It's somewhere between 35 and 40 hours per week. It's rarely more. But then there's a mistake that people calculate, oh, no, somebody's testing 40 hours per week. Well, not really. Average amount of uninterrupted testing time in a day, it's about 3 slots of 90 minutes. And this is just a fact. Rest of the times go to the setup, to the reporting, to the communicating, different interruptions, and also tester rest. Nobody can stare at the screen for 7.5 hours without, or 8 hours without rest. And if you do, you might actually get hurt, or you might lose your focus, and the quality of your testing is going to suffer as well. So on average, we have about 15 testing sessions per week. But you have to take this into account when you are mapping to do desired coverage. Okay, this is what I have per person, and that's gonna cut you down in save you lots of troubles towards the end of the project. Because one of the most common mistakes I've seen is that, oh, the working hours are 37.5 hours per week, hence tester is testing 37.5 hours per week. Not really. And of course, this will help you to check when you look at what's the project deadline. It will help you to calculate how many people you actually need to have desired coverage. So first technique I'm going to talk about is the Delphi technique. It's based on surveys, and it's really about collecting information from the experts. So from the senior people in your team who did this before, who have the knowledge and experience, and each task that you need to estimate is assigned to each team member, and through different multiple rounds, they kind of give their input, and you will get the most the best assessment on how long something takes to do. So you will get feedback, and it's kind of a heuristic method. And as I said, like, experience really helps a lot, and especially when you get the multiple points of view, you're gonna get pretty solid estimate. It gives good confidence, and it can be also very nicely combined with the other estimation techniques. There are different ways to do it as well. For example, in my personal experience, we did it at the beginning of each sprint, especially for some new features that required more complex features, and it actually helped quite a lot to improve our estimates. And since we started to use it, we were like always on time. We were never late with our updates. So in reality, depending on your team and how organized it is, this can work really well. Then there's another method called work breakdown structure, or WBS. This is also very useful. It basically, if you have a really big task, sometimes it's very hard to make any estimates because it's just overwhelming. You know, if you're saying like, hey, we are just gonna build the whole new event system from the scratch, it sounds like, oh wow, this is big. How are we gonna? It takes lots of different parties. How are we gonna estimate this? So this is about breaking down a really big task into individual components and into hierarchical structure. So as the word says, so it's called work breakdown structure. These modules are then divided into smaller submodules, and if needed, these submodules can be also divided into functionality. And those functionalities can be divided into sub-functionalities. So basically, you'll break it down for as long as it makes it a simple task, and it makes it easier to estimate. Of course, after breakdown is finished, you really need to review to check that each and every functionality is covered in the work breakdown structure, because sometimes, if you split it too much, you might kind of disconnect the pieces. And this is very easy, then it makes, well, relatively easy to map all the tasks that needs to be done and how long is it going to take. This is also one of the methods that I used in my work, and it worked really, really well, and especially when we had a complex features which required work from several different disciplines, and when we had a combination of senior and junior people working on it. So this way of working really helped to map it out and to have overall understanding across the team how to do something and how long is it going to take. So then we have a 3 points estimation, which is relatively similar to the work breakdown structure technique. Here also tasks are broken into subtasks, and then for each of these subtasks we give 3 different types of estimations. One is optimistic estimate. So this is like best case scenario. Nothing goes wrong, everything is working great, there's no surprises, nobody makes mistakes, nobody falls sick, all the conditions are optimal, no hardware gets broken or displaced, and this would be a value A. Then we give most likely estimate based on the experience of the team and the information we have. So what's the most likely duration? And we predict there might be some problems on the way, but the things will go generally right. And this is going to be value M. And then there's a pessimistic estimate, which is kind of worst case scenario where everything goes wrong, or everything we can predict goes wrong. And this value is going to be named B. The formula to find value for this is A plus 4 times M plus B divided by 6. We give a little bit extra weight to the value M, which is most likely estimate, because in reality, that's why it's called the most likely estimate. It's the one which is most likely going to happen based on our best knowledge. So in this way, we would consider this one being probably the most realistic. So it's a weighted bit more than the other two, but we take other two into account as well. This can be pretty handy, and it will give you a quite good estimate of how long is something going to take to do. And then we have a functional point measure. So we give every functional point away. It's depending on the is it like something which is very complex to do? Is it something that's a medium way to do, or is it a simple thing to do? And then, so depending, this is something that it's done based on the available documentation. So we use documents like use cases, GDD, whatever documentation we have available. And the functional point is measured from the user point of view. So basically we give away a functional point, which gives us a total. And every point, it will usually have defined hourly base, so how many hours it takes for one point. And by multiplying, we are gonna get a total effort per person hour. This is this is something that we usually do relatively early in the project. This is what we do when we don't have much information. It's based on similar project and general organization standards, but as I said, this is kind of what we take into account. We have lots of unknown, and it's really going to give us, I would not take this as a precise measure, although you're going to get very precise number. This is just a starting point. And I believe that maybe the other techniques probably will give you more more exact tools on to measure how long some tasks are gonna take. But as I said, if you're just starting, if it's a new project, if you don't have much information, this is a pretty good starting point. Now, a little bit about scheduling. Again, when we talk about production against production, then this is a really big topic. But here, a bit about testing scheduling, just to touch down on it. General rule of thumb is to test a lot and to test early. What does this mean in practice? There is some skill and wisdom to it as well. Testing too much of the wrong things too early can cause problems and can be actually counterproductive. Involving external QA too early in the game development can also be problematic, because they might be, especially when you start working with external partners, they might be very keen, they are still learning about the project, so you might get lots of irrelevant bugs really early, and they kind of clog the development process. What is usually recommended when you're starting testing early? First, test architecture stability and core game designs, because these are the things that will be probably the most finished or the most documented in the early stages of development. And you want to fix any of the problems with that relatively early, because they're kind of foundation for everything else that comes afterwards in the game. So these are the things that you should focus on early in testing. Also decide in which stages you're going to use external QA. This is going to help you with your scheduling, but also with your budgeting as well. So when will you start to use external partners? What kind of external partners you are looking for? Are you going to use them at all? Can you handle everything internally? So this really helps. And in my experience, it's really necessary to consult with the design and coding team when you're scheduling QA. Doing it separately from the rest of the team, in my experience, is the recipe for disaster. There are always some insights, there are always some bits and pieces that are not obvious or visible from the documentation. So I would always recommend meet up with all of your team, from the product managers, but also to the developers and to the artists and game designers, literally even marketing, everybody who is on your team. Try to understand their point of view and their schedule, and combine everything with your testing schedule, because it's really going to help you being really accurate and support your team and support the product in the best possible way. So here are some of the project test strategies. Now, I wrote them here to be very nice, and they might be a bit generic, but I'll try to dig in a little bit into at least some of them. It's really important. Note down the areas of potential uncertainty and the risk. The more you are with a certain project, the more you will understand where the uncertainties are and where the risk is. And when these areas are identified, be very cautious about them, and also have some sense of urgency about these risk areas. So always promote, there should always be a time to test these areas of concern. Track the status of the risk areas throughout the project, because some areas that used to be risk area before, they might change. and vice versa. Some parts of the game that were pretty stable and would not consider risks, they might change in the future. Establish controls to manage the introduction of new risks. Now, this is something that I put here very nicely, but in reality, this might be very hard to do because the closer we are getting to the submission, so to like finalizing the game, there would be more voices getting in. There might be sudden changes, there might be market changes, there might be requests from different directions, and all of this puts a pressure on a team to introduce new features or to change something which was, let's say, technically confirmed to work. And of course, that's introduction of new risks. And the later we make more massive changes, the higher the risk. So there should be some kind of control to manage this. It's not only in the hands of QA, this is very often in the hands of the product owner or producer, but QA should be here involved as well and have their voice in saying, hey, if we do this, this might delay the testing, or we might retest something, or we might have to increase the effort. Then minimize the coupling between risky components and the rest of the product. Again, this is something that unfortunately it's not only on the QA, it's about the decision of the producer or product manager or lead developer. But in any way, you can try to, because this is also a way to minimize the risk, try to help minimize the coupling between the risky components and the rest of the product. Kind of try to make sure that they are kind of kept separated or in the way that they can be easily fixed or replaced. Focus more potential risk areas, test more, develop more test cases, look at it, a risk area from different angles. Staff well, to me the challenge as well, this is very nice thing to say, but it's just make sure that you have enough resources to do what you were supposed to do. And if you don't have enough staff, if you don't have enough human resources to do the testing, make sure to flag this early. It might happen there's just no budget. We say, well, you can't get more people. Then make sure to communicate to the company management saying, well, I understand this, but with these people, there is just as much as we can do. So this is what we can do. The rest is going to be risk. In that way, you kind of protect your team and also help the company management and the game leadership to understand that there are certain quality risks related to these decisions as well. If you can allow extra time to do the work, that's unfortunately in the QA world very rare that we have extra time, but always try to get a bit of extra time if you can, and build consensus about acceptable quality. Now, this is something that comes from both sides because QA can very often be very focused on quality, while on the other hand, then you have a product manager or producer who is under pressure to deliver things really fast. And the truth is generally somewhere in the middle. So it's good to understand and agree on what is acceptable quality for all parties. Because that's also going to decrease the stress on the team as well. This is a time also for the QA to be maybe more understanding and patient, because of course when you're in a QA, you see things a bit differently and you take quality really to your heart. But on the other hand, there's a commercial concern as well that certain products have to be out in a certain time. So going to find a happy balance between. And these are some of the, let's call it end game, which is really not the end game anymore. It's submissions test strategies. So kind of how the test management behavior should change towards the end of the testing cycle, or meaning that when the product is coming out of the market. First thing I would say, definitely increased monitoring of the test efforts, of the bug statuses, of the development work, because it's really, this is a time where everybody has to be flexible and agile, and the faster we notice any challenges, the better we can address them. prepare yourself for the rescheduling and changing priorities. The things in this stage can change really fast, and the testing team should be prepared for this as well. It can be frustrated, and the more the testing team is prepared, at least aware this is going to happen, it's going to be easier to accept. There's going to be also more work with team coordination. There might be need to switch people around, maybe even have some overtime. Very often in this stage there's a need for overtime, or you might have to increase the number of external testers or freelancers working on a project. But it also means there will be more things that you'll have to agree on with the rest of your team, so it's time to kind of work more on the consensus management as well. This is a good time to start problem triage and troubleshooting. Triage is usually a meeting where you meet up with a couple of other team members. I usually call representative producer, product owner, representative of the business, lead developer, somebody who represents the developer, lead designer, lead artist, and really go into if we have any problems, we discuss it together, what's the best way to resolve it, to make kind of consensus about it. And that also would include certain bugs as well. Of course, this is a time when you could have like a beta testing, or very often in a mobile free-to-play games, this is a time when the games go to the soft launch, and they release just in certain territories. We start to get a first players feedback as well, which might affect what we are doing. And there's something called level 3 testing, which I would say it's a pretty good strategy to actually implement as soon as you start testing, where you classify tests in a 3-level system. Level 1 tests the test established the major functions of the product data work. So it would be like basic acceptance testing, for example. Level 2 tests would establish that the major and minor functions of the product work together in a variety of situations. So that means that the small things will also work if you behave in a different ways in the game. And the level 3, the tests that target performance of the game, so like frame rate per second, are there any lag, things like that. Usability, how does it behave, error handling, how does it behave under stress, recovery, installability, which is like, can it be installed as it's supposed to be, and that can be very important. Reliability under high loads, long-term reliability, and of course compatibility with the platform and target devices. Here it's really important. I call it the green light process. It's a process where it's decided that the game is good enough to be submitted to go live. And this process is now coming to power. It's good to set it up as soon as possible. And QA always has a part in this process. Sometimes the QA owns it, sometimes it's part of it, but now it's a time when it kind of comes into execution. And have some kind of project closure. I put project closure here under quotations, because with modern free-to-play games never really end, but you might be, depending on your organization, you might have to hand off project to somebody else, or to extended team or different team. But even if you don't, even you still continue working on it, it's really good to have a retrospective, to look into, okay, what did we do well, what did we learn, what we can improve on. And so regardless of how the project is continuing forward, I always find it very, very useful for the whole team to do that. Now, for the end, I would like to talk a bit about the QA team structure. And as I said before, this is really just kind of touching down on the QA management. There are many ways how you can build your QA team structure. Like, as there are many managers, there are many ways. Personally, I found this to be one of the best ways that worked for me. So I'm sharing it here. That the core of your QA team would be embedded QA, so that you'll have one, or maybe depending on the size of and complexity of your game, maybe even 2 QA people who are part of your team, who kind of join in relatively early into the team development efforts. And on the side, you have a team of testing experts, so-called testing ninjas, you can call them anyway. And these are usually the experts in a certain areas of the certain testing areas, and they come in the times of need, or the times when you have areas of risk, when it's a crunch time, close to submission time. So they are here to kind of help out with some specific things or some very important things to the risky areas of when we are just running out of time. And then of course you have external QA that you plan early on in which capacity you're going to use and throughout your project, and when. And for certain things, like for example, like localization QA, it's most of the time we use external QA. There's just a couple of really big gaming studios who have their own internal team. And the QA management goes through all of that, so it kind of encompasses all of these different parts of QA. But as I said, this is something that I found personally that worked for me the best in my experience. But depending on the team or company size, games they make, this could work very, very different from having only one QA person who does everything to having everything outsourced to some kind of different ways of doing it. And it's a QA job to adjust with whatever situation is and just do our best. But when we see if there's something can be done better, it's always good to suggest as well.